So, in this segment, we're going to be discussing the Guardian's view on Brexit barriers and the impact of young people. They're claiming kind of a new deal is needed, and I'm not sure what the limitations are, how much limitations there are on third countries. But the way they list it out, it's not great. I'll be honest. So, an estimated three-quarters of young people aged between 18 and 24 voted Remain in the 2016 Brexit referendum. Many did so in the conviction that leaving the European Union would turn Britain into a smaller, more insular place, closing off possibilities and prospects in their own lives. They feared a birthright was being lost, one which allowed them bigger, wider sense of belonging. And in my opinion, one of the issues was that, yes, young people voted predominantly to Remain. The issue was the turnout wasn't the highest. Young people just don't turn out to vote, and it's a massive problem, in my opinion. I kind of get sometimes why people don't come out to vote, but I think if you want to make yourself an important voting bloc, there's a reason why the triple lock pension never gets touched, or very rarely got touched, only once. Despite all the chaos we've had, it's because old people vote. So if you mess around with the triple lock, the old people will let you know about it, and because they're an important voting bloc, you can't annoy them. Whereas younger people, you can get away with annoying them because they're not going to turn out to vote anyways. So it was inevitable with Brexit. It was always going to make us insular, because even some very left-wing people wanted the end of freedom of movement because they kept pushing the idea of cheap labour, when all we really needed was better labour laws and more opportunities for people here. Getting a vocational course is expensive and might mean you have to travel far for said course. I can speak from personal experience. Both my brothers wanted to do both did carpentry level 1, and they had to go out of town for it. Not too far out of town, but far enough where you need a car. You genuinely need a car, and he was saying there's people from further out, in other towns that would go there to study because there's not many vocational colleges in the UK. And that's a massive problem. But some people in the wings of politics, the far left, the far right, just kept blaming foreigners. So even a Lexit would have made the UK more insular. Most people in that age bracket right now, 86% of people would vote to rejoin the EU if it was on the table. It's just sad that they never got a say, and they never will get a say. Because I can't see it, in the next 20 years, us rejoining the EU. I just can't. I don't think it will happen. 7 years on from the referendum, that judgment is vindicated in a report by a cross-party committee of House of Lords entitled The Future UK-EU Relationship. The peers' analysis finds that since the implementation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement in 2021, quote, post-Brexit barriers to mobility between the UK and the EU in both directions have had especially significant impact on young people, end quote. And, that's not a surprise. Without freedom of movement, it's difficult to get around. Going on short holidays, either way, is prohibitive. Working abroad has become more difficult to the point where UK-based service providers are struggling to export their services. The idea that you can be headhunted by companies EU-wide is gone, and there are a lot of international companies based in the EU that you could work for. Obviously not me because I have no skills, but lots of other people do, and you can get picked up by big companies. Big companies. We did not value freedom of movement enough in this country, not even close, and it's just caused endless problems. For emerging musicians seeking to tour in Europe, new regulations and visa restrictions that penalise inexperience have created, quote, an unmitigated disaster, end quote, in the words of one industry specialist quoted in the report. For other types of performers and artists, there is a similarly dismal story. Pathway to temporary professional employment in the EU, once a broadened experience and contacts the early phase of working life, are now more difficult to access. Government guidance to those navigating the new labyrinth of regulations has been woefully inadequate, and EU member states have different rulings on things like musicians, so you might be able to tour in, say, Spain visa-free, but you might need a visa or paperwork for France. So if you wanted to move all your equipment, you could do so via the Dover-Calais crossing, but then you run into a lot of red tape. You might get questioned on what you're doing in France. Plus, getting your equipment through is another problem. Customs can be a nightmare for musicians, with everything having to be logged, and some of these musicians carry a lot of equipment with them. Stories of musicians being unable to go on tour in either direction have been noted for a while, and these musicians bring in a lot of money. There's more lost revenue for the UK. EU-based musicians have other countries they can tour in. US musicians have missed out the UK just because moving their stuff to the EU from the UK is a massive headache. Chances for musicians and people looking to work placements or even study abroad have been snatched by the Tories. The EU offered continuation of the Erasmus programme, but the boneheads in charge said no. The EU offered a scheme for musicians. The UK said no. A middle finger to the youth. That's what this is. They've taken so many opportunities away from people. It's just sad. Further down the age range, school trips have become complicated to pull off in both directions as a result of post-Brexit related difficulties. The UK border forces refusal to accept ID cards in place of passports and visas has contributed to a drop-off in the number of visiting European school groups. In 2020, the number of pupils on group trips to the UK was 83% lower than pre-pandemic. At universities, the ending of the Erasmus programme has led to an accompanying decline in EU students. Britain has still not committed to rejoining the EU's Horizon scheme, a potentially transformative collaborative space for young academics. And some of these things we've covered before, the lost tourism from the EU schools who came to the UK, some people called it Kafkaesque what the UK has done to some of these school kids, right? They can't come here anymore because some of the kids don't have EU passports, meaning they need expensive visas, which the Home Office can reject. And you're talking a couple €100 for some of these. The 83% figure is massive. Combine that with lost tourism because EU citizens can no longer use ID cards here. The loss of EU students because we're charging them more post Brexit, and there's more hoops for them to go through. When the EU has lots of universities that they can study in, and they'll be far more welcoming of them. Losing more and more scientists because we still have not rejoined the Horizon programme because we're trying to nickel and dime the EU. Brexit was meant to create a global Britain, but all we have done is close ourselves off to Europe and not open ourselves up to the rest of the world. They kept saying the rest of the world trade will make up for lost EU trade. First they said we'll keep all the EU trade, then add lots of rest of the world trade. Then it was all the rest of the world trade will replace lost EU trade. But that's failed. We knew it was never going to work. Just like they claimed that touring would replace Erasmus, another failure. All we did was close ourselves off to Europe and the rest of the world. Not global Britain, but insular and isolated Britain. A sad sight. And a country that never understood its role post the collapse of the empire. I think, in my opinion, after Suez, we figured things out. And then the next phase of, when the empire fully collapsed, when trade with the Australia and New Zealand wasn't as viable as doing trade with Europe. Once that realization was done, we joined the EEC and realized things were good. But then, once again, we got too big. We thought we were too powerful, and we were pulled back down because the Brexit deals we got were trash. Even the one with the EU is kind of trash. And as Zenyatta said, quote, "This will be a harsh lesson." End quote. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.